I'm Anne Arundel County Executive Steuart Pittman, and I want to thank you for tuning in to these Black History Month videos. The stories that you watch here are about Black Americans who work to further America's aspiration of liberty and justice for all. It's a history that has not yet been fully told because it's an aspiration that has not yet been fully realized. But I hope that you will join me throughout this month in learning the lessons of our past. Those lessons, I believe, will guide us all to a better future.
I had a dream. Oh yes, I had a dream. I had a dream of days gone by when hopes were high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. Then I was young and I was dreams were made and used and tasted. There was no ransom to be paid, no song unsung, nothing was wasted. Then the tigers come at night with their voices soft as thunder, as they tear your dreams apart, as they turn your dreams to shame, 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 shame. Walked the summer by my side. He filled my days with endless wonder. He took my childhood in his stride. Oh, but he was gone when autumn came.
In August of 2018, the world lost an icon. The Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, loomed large in our culture and hearts for decades. Franklin made an impression on millions of people, including a vocalist with the U.S. Army band Pershing's Own. Sergeant Major Crystal Reams was deeply affected by the news of Franklin's death. She cried, thinking of what the Queen of Soul had given us through her music. In this moving tribute to Aretha Franklin, Sergeant Major Reams chose to sing "I Dreamed a Dream" for a very special reason.
I chose "I Dreamed a Dream" because it was one of the performances that had the most impact on my life. I grew up in musical theater, and there weren't very many Black artists that tackled those songs with such soul and emotional power outside of the context of the actual shows. And when I heard her perform it at I think it was Bill Clinton's inauguration, it was 1993, I sat in front of the TV, I cried again, and I looked at it over and over and over again because it was such an impactful performance. She took the words and she changed them into another soulful and emotional thing that was so important at the time because there was such a divide between white and Black America. She took a song that was meant to be something else and turned it into an anthem for the unity of both races.
The following program was produced by the United States Courts.
Thurgood Marshall, the civil rights crusader, a man who was instrumental in ending legal segregation and later became the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court. In this special series we call Moments in History, we remember a man who challenged our legal system to create a more perfect union and forever change our country. Thurgood Marshall was born in 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland. His mother, an educator, and father, a railroad porter, steered Marshall into a law career. After graduating with honors from Lincoln University, Marshall applied to the University of Maryland Law School, but was denied because he was African American. So he traveled for an hour daily to Howard University Law School under the tutelage of a prominent NAACP attorney, Charles Hamilton Houston.
One of the suggestions made to Thurgood Marshall by Charles Hamilton Houston was to go to the deepest South, into those pockets of the country where resistance against equality and desegregation were the toughest, and pay attention to the people, listen to them, hear their stories, and understand that you are working for a cause that's bigger than being a lawyer, bigger than being a law graduate, bigger than even anything you can imagine in your life. And Thurgood Marshall took on that mantle.
In 1934, Marshall graduated magna cum laude from Howard. The following year, he started a private practice and eventually succeeds his mentor, Charles Houston, to become the NAACP's chief counsel. During this time, Marshall systematically dismantles the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson ruling that upheld racial segregation under the separate but equal doctrine. He argued 32 civil rights cases before the Supreme Court, winning 29.
He wanted to establish the building blocks of earlier cases. He didn't want this issue to come up early in the litigation. And I learned a lot about how a person can try to influence the development of an issue over a long period of time.
In fact, it was 13 years before Marshall had a chance to challenge separate but equal with the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954. The ruling ended segregation in the U.S. By now, Thurgood Marshall is a household name, but not everyone is in favor of the landmark decision.
It took an enormous amount of guts. He told us the story about how he'd have to move sometimes 2 or 3 times a night from home to home in order to stay safe. He told us the story about how he was very close to being lynched one time. It wasn't just his client, it was he who was in danger.
Justice Marshall was a great admirer of the man I wound up working for, Judge Harold Tyler. And Tyler had been an assistant attorney general in charge of civil rights. One day in the fall of 1960, Marshall was down in New Orleans and was advised that the Klan was coming to get him that very night. He called Tyler, he had Tyler's phone number. Within an hour, the FBI picked up Marshall and put him in a secure location and saw him through that. and Marshall credited Tyler with saving his life.
The death threats didn't stop Marshall. After the Brown versus the Board of Education ruling, Thurgood continued to defend civil rights demonstrators until he was appointed in 1961 to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Of all his rulings, none were overturned by the Supreme Court, and by 1967, Thurgood Marshall became the first African-American Supreme Court justice.
It was fascinating to see this multiple aspects of his personality, the personable, sociable storyteller, the precise taskmaster, just an amazing and remarkable, unique human being.
What was most delicious about the clerkship were these stories. And they ranged from hanging out with Langston Hughes and Lena Horne, Joe Louis, meeting with Prince Philip, helping draft the Kenyan Constitution. Every single story was like gold.
One of Marshall's favorite stories, and Marshall told stories all the time. Many of them were about race relations, many of them were serious subjects, but he always would tell a story with his booming laugh, and they always had a funny ending, even when he was making a very serious point. All the new judges were supposed to come up for a photo shoot, and the photographer blew a fuse while setting up his equipment. So they called for an electrician. Who should walk into the room next? Thurgood Marshall. The secretary looked up at him and said, "Oh, you must be the electrician." He laughed about the story. And why did he laugh? Because at the time the trade unions in New York were all segregated. And he said, "That woman must be crazy to think that I could be a member of the electricians union in New York City."
By the time I was clerking, was very interested in hiring clerks who wanted to teach. And we were involved in the hiring process. And we asked him, why do you want people who want to teach? And he had a very long view about influence. He was very explicit. He said, of course, I want the smartest people. But he also said, I want people who will pass on the lessons to a next generation.
In 1991, Thurgood Marshall announced he was retiring from the bench.
It came as a complete shock to us. The morning he did it, he called us in and he said, "Well, I've decided to give it up." And I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No, I've already sent the letter to the president." There was this part of me who, until he said that, I was going to try to talk him out of it. "No, you can't do this, you can't do it." He had already done it. And as far as I could tell, nobody in his chambers knew.
And when reporters asked him why,
"Well, I'm old. I'm getting old and coming apart."
2 years later, Thurgood Marshall passed away at the age of 84.
Or the day of the funeral, we went to the National Cathedral. President Clinton was there, the Vice President, many senators, all these important Washington people. And at the end, word got around that the law clerks were invited to the burial at Arlington. So we went there, and I assumed that a lot of Washington dignitaries would be there, but that was not the case. And it was the law clerks and the family, and Justice's family was small. And Sissy Marshall at one point turned to us and said, Thurgood regarded you as part of his family. And I guess we knew, and he wanted you to be here for this moment. And that was really wonderful.
What made Thurgood Marshall an exemplary leader, in my view, is that he never stopped having utter empathy for common folk, people who were disadvantaged, and he dedicated his life to using the law to help those folk, regardless of color.
It reinforced my interest in public service. When you have a role model like that, when a person like that is putting his life on the line in the interest of the ideals, it's very hard to want to do anything other than to find a way to give back. There's almost nothing any of us can do in this generation that rivals the level of commitment and risk that he put on the line, for the causes he believed in.
Today, you can find numerous memorials from coast to coast honoring Justice Thurgood Marshall, from courthouses to national airports, even the building I'm standing in now. For the U.S. courts in the Thurgood Marshall Federal Judiciary Building, I'm Bridget Lyles. Thanks for watching.
Your Natchez History Minute is brought to you by Natchez National Historical Park.
Hiram Revels was the first African American to serve in the United States Congress, representing Mississippi in the Senate from 1870 to 1871. Born free in September 1827, Revels was an ordained minister of the AME Church and chaplain in the Union Army from 1863 to 1865. As chaplain, he helped raise 2 African American Union regiments from Maryland and Mississippi and took part in the Battle of Vicksburg. In 1866, Revels was given a permanent pastorship at the Zion AME Church in Natchez, where he settled with his wife and 5 daughters. After his election to the U.S. Senate, Revels spoke for compromise and moderation and became a vigorous advocate for racial equality. After resigning from the Senate, he was appointed the first president of what is today Alcorn State University. Hiram Revels remained active in the ministry until his death in 1901. I'm Al Rankins Jr., the 19th president of Alcorn State University, and this has been your Natchez History Minute.
The following program was produced by the United States Courts.
I have no question but that the education and the advice that I got during my formative years is the reason that I am where I am today. I was born and raised in Mississippi by my grandparents. It was during the terrible years when African Americans were trying to get the right to vote. Also, African Americans were discouraged from going to school. We were expected to work. I started working in the field at about the age of 6 years old, and we actually worked full time, from sun up to sundown. It wasn't in this 8-hour or 10-hour day period. It was sun up to sundown. You were expected to pick at least over 100 pounds of cotton a day, but there were some people in my family who picked as much as 400 pounds. That's a lot. But looking back on it today, I think that was a great feat in itself, trying to pick 150 pounds of that light stuff. It was back-breaking, very hard, arduous work. Those were very painful times for me and for my family. My grandfather would tell me when we were driving not to look out the window, but to look at him. The reason being, he didn't want anybody to accuse me of looking at a white woman. We had another incident with a white kid. He was the same age that I was. Once Sonny turned 13, my grandfather told me we would have to start calling Sonny Mr. Sonny. And I think one of the most painful things that I have seen in my life was to see my grandfather refer to Sonny as Mr. Sonny. I told my grandfather I wouldn't do it. And that was partially the reason that my grandparents, even though they couldn't afford to do so, they decided to send me away to a boarding school in Alabama. My grandmother told me, if you get an education, you can be anything that you want to be in life. When I finished high school, my thought was to come to Chicago, and I did. I came to the promised land, and I got a job in the post office. I was a carrier, and I loved that job. It was a great job. But after about a year, I decided, this is not where I want to be 10 years from now. So I decided to enlist in the Marines. I actually went from a private to a sergeant in 2.5 years. Came back after 4 years and decided I was going to go to college. Once I started in September of '69, I just stayed there. We're talking about summers, we're talking about all year round, plus the summers. And in February of 1972, I graduated. Decided then, why not try law school? Got accepted into DePaul and graduated there in 2.5 years. I was determined that I was going to get a college education. Nothing was going to stop me. And I went through both undergraduate and law school in 5.5 years. Without an education, there's really no future.
District Court for the Northern District of Illinois is now in session. The Honorable Arlander Keys presiding.
It has as my grandmother used to say to me, you can be anything you want to be if you get an education. If you're determined that you want to be something and you're willing to work hard at it, there's no reason why you can't achieve that.
Your Natchez History Minute is brought to you by Natchez National Historical Park.
In 2004, Philip W.S. became the first African-American mayor of Natchez since Reconstruction. Born in 1946, West graduated from Sadie V. Thompson High School in 1964 and attended Alcorn State University. On the day prior to his enrollment at Alcorn, West and his father almost lost their lives at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan. Their experience prompted West to embark on a life of activism and community involvement. After a short stint in the Army, West returned to Natchez where he became active in the NAACP, serving as its president from 1974 to 1980. He also served as the vice president of the state NAACP under the leadership of the late Dr. Aaron Henry. West was elected to the Adams County Board of Supervisors in 1980 and served until 1997. He was the first African-American to serve as the president of their board. In 1997, he was elected to the Mississippi House of Representatives, serving until 2004. During his time as a state representative, West was chairman of the Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus for 2 terms. West has long been a supporter of Alcorn State University, championing its growth and development. In 2004, Philip West was elected mayor of Natchez. For over 40 years, he has worked to help make things better for Natchez in the state of Mississippi. Hi, I am Jemima McCullough, a 9th grade student in Natchez Early College Academy and the granddaughter of Mr. Philip West. And this has been your Natchez History Minute.